Welcome to a discussion where film researcher Outi Hakola will interview 3 documentary filmmakers about their films dealing with end of life. These interviews have served as a research material for Hakola's recent book Filming Death, End of Life Documentary Cinema. The book is openly available from Edinburgh University Press.
I'm now going to get you to introduce yourself and the film that you are part of the book in. So if we go from the order that I've known you, so we start from Edgar.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for showing up, and thank you so much for this wonderful event. I'm an independent documentary filmmaker here based outside of Chicago, and my film is called Prison Terminal, The Last Days of Private Jack Hall. And it's basically following a hospice program inside the walls of the Iowa State Penitentiary, where the prisoners are trained as hospice volunteers and they help their buddies go through the dying process. So that's it in a nutshell. It's a short film, 40 minutes.
And then Claudia.
Hi, my name is Claudia Tosi, and I'm a documentary filmmaker based in Italy, in the northern Italy. Well, my film is entitled The Perfect Circle, which has to do with a very beautiful poem by John Donne, A Valediction Forbidding Mourning. I fell in love with that poem when I was 16, and it was in my mind. So when I did this film, I thought it was the perfect title for my film. What I did in this film was to follow 2 characters, 2 protagonists who were living inside a hospice. They were literally living there with their families, which were staying in their rooms all day long, day and night. So what I wanted to do through these 2 protagonists who were in completely different phases of their advanced illness was to understand if it's possible to re-signify life when death is around the corner. That was more or less my idea, since I just came out from a very similar story with my mother, who died for a progressive illness. So somehow I was questioning myself. And this film was a way to question myself loud. So my personal story is not in the film, but it's somehow a paradigm on which I have written this story.
Thank you. And Tim.
I'm Tim Wilson, and I almost say reluctantly I'm a documentary filmmaker. I've not made as many ambitious films as my colleagues. And Grief Walker, my film, the most ambitious by far of the films I've done in terms of size and budget and time it took, came about as a result of a near catastrophic collapse. I went in for what was supposed to be a routine operation of a gallbladder, and it ended in complete sepsis, and my wife was told by the doctors it's probable that he's not going to make it through the night, but I did. I quite remarkably, almost magically came out of it. My friend Stephen Jenkinson, who is the other protagonist in my film, came to visit me and watched closely what was happening to me. And after I came out of it, I was having lunch with him one day, and I said, "Here are the plans. I'm going to go make my films." And I moved my family to Nova Scotia, and things are almost going to be fine. And he stopped. This is the beginning of the film. I'm sorry, I'll just put it there. And he looked at me and he said, "You don't sound to me like a man who's been given his life back." And I'm getting chills now as I say that. And that just stopped me right in my tracks. And I thought, I need to smarten up and be more grateful. Anyway, so that was the start of the film, and the film basically addresses that.
Well, I guess we already a little bit you went into that, but if you want give a little bit more details of what inspired each of you to make the documentary, so that it is exactly about death and dying. What did you want to say with this film? So we can go back from this, so Tim, you can continue that from the same thought.
Well, that was it, but I also need to confess to the fact that it was a kind of career opportunity, because up until that time I had done documentaries for national television, but they were shorter and they were kind of news-like things. And this was the first really cogent personal essay I had done. And the National Film Board had seen a short film that I did when I moved to Nova Scotia. I grew up in Western Canada and then lived for too long a time in Toronto. And when I moved to, as a result of this hospital procedure, I moved to Nova Scotia with my family. And I promised myself I would never make a film about fish. And of course, the first damn film I made was about a guy, a fisherman who I loved. Film board liked that. And then they said, we'd like to talk. Do you have any film in mind? And I said, well, I have this friend who's an amazing, he's made it his life's project to teach about death and to deal with the culture's ignorance about death and so they said yes, and that started it. And we filmed for, I had been filming him for about 5 or 6 years before that, and then we started Grief Walker, and that was probably 2 years. But I also, the thing that I wanted to say, Outi, is that, and I hope it's not jumping the gun, is that I was trying to grab the most substantial subject I could. I mean, I wanted to deal with something big and heavy and important. And I thought, what is there more grave, than death? So I was trying to, get a leg up on something huge.
And Claudia?
But when I decided to make this film, there were different things getting together. Well, in 2010, in Italy, we had a law so that palliative care entered amongst the services offered by the national health system. And, people didn't know anything about palliative care. They were afraid of that. And hospices were considered to be places where people go to die. So it happened that this hospice, which you have seen in my film, asked me to make a sort of promotional video for them in order to win this resistance from the people. I didn't want to do it because my mother was dying at that time. They contacted me in 2009, right before the law was approved. And I said, no, I'm not interested. It's not the right moment for me. But then the next year, I was, unemployed because I just delivered the film. So I said, okay, it's a work for hire. I don't want to do it. It's a little bit too tough for me, but there is nothing else on the horizon. So let's do it. And I did it. And I shot this promotional film. I did it along 10 days, but it was so refreshing for me to be there. I could deal with my emotion. I could discuss them with therapists and psychologists. I could observe other families go through what I went through with my family. And for me, it was for the first time something like a safe place to be, in order to understand, face, and deal with my confrontational emotions. So after that experience, I thought, well, here there is much more than a promotional video to shoot. So I decided to make a documentary. And I wanted in that documentary to embody the emotions I went through with my mother, but also the most important lesson I learned during her illness, which was that she was a person, behind the mask of the illness, there still was the person, because I realized that people, when they came to visit us, they only saw the illness. They talked about her as if she was not in the room, but she was in the room. They were kind of embarrassed by something. And I really wanted to make a film where people could see the person behind the illness. That was my let's say, my drive. And I wanted to make it big, to show it everywhere in Italy, in order to help people to see illness and people in a different manner. and it was very powerful for me to do it in this way. And I wanted to do it through an emotional narrative, through an emotional dramaturgical structure. I wanted people to feel relief. When you work with palliative care practitioners, it means that you're not alone. I mean, you have to ask for people's help so that you're not alone anymore and you can deal with illness. That was my drive.
Mm.
And Edgar, do you want to continue from that?
Sure. I actually, I've known about hospice, but I was back in 1999, I was working for the Open Society Institute in New York City. Also asked to make a work for hire, a short film about, well, they were setting up for a conference, the first conference on death and dying in prisons and jails. It was not a sexy topic, and Sister Helen Prejean from Dead Men Walking was going to speak at the conference. So the Open Society wanted a short film kind of touting a progressive program, believe it or not, down in Angola, Louisiana, where they actually have a prison hospice program down there as well, where they they started it with by training the prisoners to be hospice volunteers. So that was quite a unique program. So I was sent down there for a couple of weeks with a cinematographer, and we filmed basically a short film, 24 minutes, about how to set up a prison hospice, kind of a blueprint on how to do it, so that we could eventually not only show it at the conference, but also send it to prisons in the country to say, hey, listen, this is a program that you all should be adopting, because a huge issue coming down the pike here in the United States, where we incarcerate for such a long time that people are aging out, and we have a massive tidal wave of terminally ill prisoners. So this film went out in 1999, and I was like Claudia, I was kind of taken aback by the whole prison hospice, because I never thought about anyone dying in prison. And when I talked to people when I was making it, they're like, I didn't even think about people dying in prison. If you don't have someone in prison, you never think about how badly they do die, and they die badly in this country still. So I was quite taken aback by being down in Angola, Louisiana. It's a huge prison, very old, and it's one of our worst prisons. If you know anything about prison history, it's one of the worst prisons here in the country. And for it to have a progressive program where it incorporated prisoners as hospice volunteers was amazing. So it hit me hard, and I thought, I have to revisit this issue. And 10 years later, when I moved back to Chicago, I started looking around the Midwest for other prisons that had hospice programs, and I found one about 5 hours away from home. And I approached them and I said, listen, I want to do a long-term prison hospice film, and I want to highlight your program because they adopted the same training of prisoners in their program. By happenstance, that prison in Iowa was using my Angola film as a training tool for their graduate classes in hospice. So I, as a filmmaker, you guys will all freak out, I was given like 24/7 access to this maximum security prison to make a film about, not really about their hospice program. And for me, because I worked with a cinematographer in Angola, and it wasn't so good because I wasn't getting what I wanted and what I had in my head I wanted on film, and she wasn't doing what I was asking. I thought, well, I'm just going to film this myself. And it made it a lot easier for me to be in a prison, maximum security prison by myself. So I didn't have a crew with me, because the less people in there, the better. So for me, it was like a kid in a candy store, because I had the luxury of, I had up to a year to be in there, and I had the luxury of time. I was able to, and that's why Tim was mentioning some shots in my film where I was, I probably did that shot a million times, but it just worked out. I had no one breathing down my neck. So I was able to really follow stories and really connect with the people I was filming. Not only Jack, who was passing away in the bed, but also all the other hospice volunteers that were prisoners. They're all lifers there. They're in for murder or kidnapping or other things. So I was able to become really good friends with all of them. And to this day, and I filmed it, started my film in 2006. To this day, I still am communicating with a lot of my friends behind the walls. But the whole issue of hospice and prison My goal when I made Prison Terminal was to humanize the prisoner, and we'll talk later about when we filmed the dying process. But I thought it was important to humanize that person in bed and show the world that that person is just like your mom or your uncle or your grandfather who passed away. Just kind of level the playing field and humanize them, and and I thought that was important. And I think since I've been showing the film, it does really hit people, in a good way, across the board, whether you're a nursing student or a warden from another prison. I think it works on many levels.
Can I just say, I mean, I think Edgar, your portrayal of Jack, you're revealing his character, you're humanizing your term, was as substantial as in Claudia's film. I mean, I had a feel for his person and his soul, if I may say it,
Yeah.
on top of the issue of the service.
Thanks. I think again that that was because I had the time. I mean, thankfully I was able to leave prison. I was there for 6 months actually. I didn't end up staying a year. But again, I got to know Jack way before I even brought in the camera. I was for about the first month or two, I was just getting to know everybody just so they would take me seriously, because I was the first filmmaker that maximum security prison had ever let into a prison. So I had to pinch myself, but also realize that everyone was very suspicious of me. Not necessarily the prisoners, but a lot of the medical staff and the correctional staff were very hesitant to be friendly with me. But that it warmed up. It did warm up eventually. But thank you, Tim. Yeah.
He opened it to you.
Yeah.
But something that hit me about your film, Edgar, was when someone said, these people taking care of other inmates, they are able somehow to ask for forgiveness, to repair for some bad things they did. And
Yeah.
actually, from a, let's say, philosophical point of view, that's really, really strong. I mean, taking care, I think it's really the meaning of being human. So, and I never thought that that would be an excellent way to help people to process what they did and start a new life by taking care of others. That was really strong. I never thought about that. You showed me something which I was totally unaware about. And it, as I wrote to you, I will take it with me forever. I mean,
Oh, wow.
that's, I mean, the way how I was looking at those, at a certain point, while you were writing in caption what they did, I didn't want to know it anymore. Because the way how they behaved were clashing with the idea that they kidnapped someone or that they killed someone. It was like it was another person. Okay,
Yeah.
it was still them. But they were really trying to be human beings inside the prison. And that was really, really beautiful, I think. Really, I was not seeing prisoners anymore. I was not seeing murderers anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's beautiful. Thank you for that. I think it is these programs, and there are very few of them. I mean, we have 1,800 correctional facilities here in the United States, and only 70 have hospice programs. And out of that 70, only like maybe, very few, like 20, 25, 30 incorporate the prisoner into the care of their friend who's passing away. So there's very few programs, and that's one reason why I made the film, just get these programs out there, because the redemptive quality of the program it not only helps Jack, the person who's passing away in the bed, but it also helps all the hospice volunteers realize, put things in perspective and what life means and the value of life. And for a lot of them, this is the first time ever, or in many, many, many years, where they're actually able to show love and affection and compassion to another human being, to actually be able to touch somebody and not be, written up because it's a violation, to be able to hold somebody or massage their back or put lotion on their feet. These are huge things. These are almost like miracles that they're happening in prison, because that would not happen elsewhere. So what you said, Claudia, thank you so much. That's what I just wanted to humanize people. And I think at the end of the day, yes, these men in this prison made horrible mistakes and hurt many, many people. But in order to rehabilitate on a huge level, on a very deep level, this program is is a miracle. It's fascinating, and it should be incorporated widely. But thanks for your observation. Appreciate that.
All right. Well, I gave you some kind of advanced questions, and one of them was to think about a short story or moment that came either from when you were filming and meeting with these people, or a moment within your film that you really felt like this is something where you find a specific meaning. So before I get you to speak, I'm just going to give one of my own memories of doing my research project. And it was actually when I had a flu, and I was kind of behind my schedules, and I was like, I don't know if I can take a day off. So I decided that what I can do is always that I can watch these films, that I have a pile of films to go through that I haven't watched yet. And during that day, I think I watched like 4 or 5 of these in a row. And then my husband came back from work home, and he found me crying. He said, "Oh my God, what is wrong? What has happened?" I go, "Oh, I've been just working the whole day," because each of the films was moving in their own way and very emotional. So I don't know if it was very wise decision to do 5 in a day and then try to deal with those emotions. But it was kind of an emotional journey to go through with all these materials and fates that people have, and how they view the life. So how about your specific moments or memories from the way? Claudia, we could start from you.
Oh, I really don't know. Something that has stayed with me after the film was the day when Ivano died. In the film, there are 2 characters, Ivano and Maris, and their families. Maris didn't die during the shooting session, but Ivano did. And he died while I was shooting with Maris. So I was not there. I was there before, but not in that very moment. But when he died, and they told me it was midday, I was upstairs, and I felt some headache, some stomach ache somehow. I didn't know why. I mean, I was well before, but there was something going wrong. And I said to the cinematographer, let's stop for a while because I don't feel well right now. So we went out from the room, and the psychologist told me that Ivano just died. And at that point, my stomach was completely tight and it was hurting a lot. And it was so weird for me because during the 8 days, even though I saw him kind of fading away somehow, I felt well because I saw that he was taken care of, and his wife was always there by his side, and everything was really beautiful. And my mind was, I was in complete peace, but somehow I was split. My stomach was going into a direction which my mind could not control. So it was the first time in my life that I realized how maybe unbalanced I am, how split I am, how I'm always trying to have control, but in certain moments I have no control at all. And Ivano was a sort of, mirror for me. So I think I will never forget that moment, as also I will never forget once that the daughter of Mary's was preparing her for the dinner, and we were outside the room. I put this scene in the film, and the daughter is taking advantage of the situation to hug her, embracing her, to come up from the bed. She's really hugging, because Mary's didn't like to be hugged too much. She was very, kind. She was the general. She was called the general. But the daughter was trying to hug her every time she could. And there is this beautiful scene of the daughter putting some warm cloth on her, preparing the table, hugging her. And it was like going back to my mother and my mother's times. So that was really my scene. That is my scene in the film, like Hitchcock, that sometimes is in his film. That's my Hitchcock scene, okay? It's me in the scene. So I will take these moments with me forever.
I love that scene because I was watching it this morning and I love she was wrapping her mother and to the point like she couldn't even eat because she had so many things around her shoulders. I love that scene. Yeah. And I love your angle from it because you were observing it but you were letting it play out because you knew it meant a lot to you. I was thinking that. I was like, this scene must mean a lot to Claudia because it's being played out in a beautiful way. Yeah, now I understand it even more. Thanks for sharing that.
Do you want to continue from that?
Me
Edgar.
or
Edgar, yeah, your
Okay.
moment.
well, I don't know if it was I mean, there's a million stories. I mean, I shot in this prison for 6 months and I came out with 300 hours of footage.
Wow.
And to only and I couldn't find funding because again, the death and dying is not high on the list of priority list of funding. And then death and dying of prisoners is definitely buried. No pun intended. That's horrible. But so I was unable to get funding. So I started editing myself. And as my fellow filmmakers may realize, when you edit your own footage, sometimes you fall in love with. Because I remember shooting so many scenes and all the emotional connections I had with some of the scenes. So those scenes were definitely going to be in. So I was editing this myself, and by the time I was done, I had like a 6-hour mini series on prison hospice, which was not going to play anywhere in the world because it would be way too long. So thankfully, long story short, I was able to eventually get the eyes of HBO to take a look at my footage, and they hooked me up with a editor who was able to, bring it down. And but my story, I think, that came out of this whole thing is, um, there's I there's different ways people die in prison. There's 3 ways. You die either alone in your cell, alone in the infirmary. If they don't prison hospice, there's no guarantee anyone's near you, or you die off-site in a state hospital or also shackled to your bed with 2 guards outside your door with no family members. So hospice, if it's done properly, like you see in my film, where families are incorporated into the care of their loved one, and they are allowed visitors from not only the family but also the friends from inside the prison are able to sit at their bedside. So I think the story that for me was just this realization that at the end of the day, we are all, at the end of the day, we're all human beings, and that despite our faults, people are able to transcend and connect. And I think I saw that not only with Jack's family, but also I filmed a couple other people who were also passing away. Those were very, very, how the prison melts away when these type of programs are allowed to flourish. And I think that for me, was a big eye opener. And it was a long learning process, but that's what I take away from my time in filming in the prison.
And Tim.
Oof. Just listening to you is making thankful. Remember the emotional moment in my film that most struck me, and it was just a tiny little moment when the father of the child we don't see the child die, we don't see any the only footage we see of the child is a home movie that he and his wife have made, Jonathan. And the day that he heard that I was going to be leaving the next morning, he asked to come over, and he brought the film, the video that he'd made of his daughter. And as he was setting it up, there was just a moment where his voice choked, and I'm going to weep now just remembering it. The beauty of his feeling was so pronounced, and I've not forgotten that. And I could sort of expand on that by saying, I mean, the purpose of my film was for me to kind of smarten up and do something about my naivete and my denial about death. I mean, how is it that a 50-year-old man in this culture grows up and doesn't really make room for the fact that he's going to die? That's essentially what the starting point of it was. And I chose Stephen Jenkinson, my friend and prodigious tutor on this, to smarten me up and to educate me about these things. And there weren't many. There might have been one emotional moment where I'm filming him at a big lecture that he's giving to a huge crowd in Toronto, and he's talking about his feeling about bringing his own children, his 2 children, into the world, and realizing that he was bringing them into a place where they would die. And he stopped and he said, "That puts a lump in my throat." Now, you didn't really see the lump in his throat, but that was the closest we got to him expressing a visible feeling in a way. I'm not saying he doesn't feel. It's just that he has a manner in his public presentations that appears to some cold. But the takeaway moment for me really came later in the film. One of the sort of memes in the film was we're always paddling somewhere. We're in a boat, and I mean I like to think of that metaphorically as crossing the Styx. I mean, but it's a canoe, which is a gorgeous, not just Canadian, but let's say it's a Canadian symbol, and and um, and I was finally saying, enough of this grief stuff. I mean, why are you going on about all this grief? I mean, look at that beautiful flower. Can't you just appreciate the beauty of that? And he stops and he goes like, you don't see anything if you don't see the death of that flower, because it's going to be gone tomorrow, and so might you be gone. And I thought, whoa, that one that still stays with me. And I've just used that image in a new film I've just finished. But the other thing he said on that same trip was, you survived, you escaped dying, and I saw you just as you were nearly dying. And you're talking about it now as if it was a kind of a battle that you won against death. And I realized he was right. I had sort of considered that I had overcome it somehow or set it aside somehow. And he said, you haven't even begun to learn if you haven't made room for it every moment. You're dying. You are dying now, not you will die. We are. And I think that's one of the pithiest of his teachings is that we are in the process of that. It's a presence, not an absence.
Well, I think I'll use this as a bridge to the book title. Its title is Filming Death. And why I chose that title is that already, if we go back into the 1940s and film theory, one of the earliest arguments in film theory was that you shouldn't film dying people because film is technology and death is transcendental, and you should never mix these two because film can't really reach the moment of death. So this was one of the things I wanted to think about when I was writing my death. And my argument is that you actually can and should film, and film can also be transcendental in its moments. But all of you had different approaches to whether how detailed you wanted to show the actual death or the dying process very close to the death. So would you like to share a little bit about your thoughts about why you chose to film the actual moment, or why you might have chosen to do it in a different way? Tim, would you like to continue from this?
Oof. Well, this is going to sound terrible. Part of me chickened out from filming it. I mean, I couldn't quite bring myself to impose myself in that moment. And so, and I find myself when I'm taking photographs, I can't take pictures of people in extreme suffering. I just can't do it. But I kind of justified that to myself, and I took sincerely when Werner Herzog was talking about his making of I was going to say Gorilla, the bear, the film about the bear. What's it called? Grizzly Man. Have you seen the film?
Yeah.
And it's about a man called Timothy who's killed by a bear, and his camera is still running. And in Herzog's film, he adamantly refused, not even let alone show the film, even to play the audio of it and to give any sense of it. All you see is his response to it. And he was explaining that in a video that I saw, saying, a person's death is the most private moment of their life. And I, Werner Herzog, have no right to impose myself on that, even if they were to ask it. I'm not sure he added that, but I agree with that. There's a weird kind of irony in this, is that the title Grief Walker, which was not the first one suggested, Walker, it's kind of like an indigenous title. but it's actually named after Peter Walker, who was a cinematographer in Toronto, who was the cinematographer for Dying at Grace, which is a very substantial film about Grace Hospital, about death in that place. And it came to me that morning that I was asked to produce a title. And I was always upset by that film showing the moment of death. And I remember Alan King saying, well, they asked me to do it. And I thought, I'm not sure I would even trust someone asking me to do it. I don't know. I'm still wrestling with it. But I chose not. And I just say that in the moment in my film where Sandra, who I follow more closely than I think the others, you see her. I'm close up on her hand. She twitches, and then the film sort of fades away, and she's in a canoe out on the water, drifting away. That was not the moment of her death. That was my romanticizing of it, and I feel a little, wrestling a bit with that too. But I'm glad I didn't film the moment of her death. I was there shortly before she died in the room, and I just couldn't bring myself to doing it. For one, she had a young niece sitting in the corner who was like hospice service watch. And I thought, I don't want to introduce a camera to this. Mm. So I've never done it.
And Claudia, you come close, you film Ivano in the deathbed, but not the actual moment. So how did you choose to do that?
I didn't choose. I was just somewhere else. So I didn't shoot that moment. So I don't have to ask myself whether I would have used it or not. But the truth is that when the hospice gave me the permission to shoot my film, we made an agreement. And the agreement was I stay in the room when the patient and the family wants me in the room, and I leave when they want me to leave. So fortunately, the question whether to shoot death of someone or not was not my decision. They had to allow me to be there. This was the only rule I had to follow when I was in the hospice. In fact, if you remember, for those who have seen the film, the scene when Ivano is doing music therapy, and he doesn't like to do the music therapy. At a certain point, when finally the therapist asked him, what would you like, Ivano? He said, I want to be left alone, just leave. So the cinematographer and we went out immediately. I didn't ask, do you mind if I stay? I only have one shot. I could ask people once, but if they say no, it's no. So he said, leave, we left. And that's when we kind of got his trust, his complete trust. It's like, okay, they do what I want them to do. So they are my people. That's when he chose us instead of the therapist. In fact, from that moment until the end, I was in his room all the time because he wanted to be with us, to talk about normal things. But I don't know if the wife would have wanted us to be there in the very end. It came really suddenly. Nobody expected that it could happen in so few days. I mean, he entered into the hospice, that it was in excellent shape, and he died 6 days later. It was really completely unexpected. It happened, out of the blue. So I don't know. I mean, unfortunately, I cannot answer to you.
And Edgar, you had a very different way of solving this. So are we still having Edgar on the line?
Edgar has left the room.
Yeah, his connection has not today been the best. Well, we hope that he'll come shortly and can answer, because Edgar actually chooses to show the moment of death. So that would be nice to hear about his things. But while waiting for him, let's just move on. I think due to the time, we're gonna jump a little bit to the end of the part on the questions of how do you think about the death attitudes in the Western world, or your own attitudes? And do you think that these kind of documentary films can make a difference in how we think about death and dying? So, Tim, you especially had very philosophical approach in your film. So
No,
I
I would point to Claudia's film as a perfect example of what I think. I mean, what I'm so grateful a film can do is that the poetry in that. I think somehow that metaphor and poetry gets closer to the mystery than factual documentary. I'm not by any means excluding what Edgar has done, because the feeling and his commitment and his wish to serve in that is its power. Um, um, but this may be trying too much, but I think our culture has become less and less tolerant of an understanding of mystery. I mean, it is the great mystery, and somehow we're wanting to get on top of it and do it via science or do it via political intervention. I just think misses it, and so I think again that Claudia's film and at moments maybe my film too sort of I think I kind of approach it as a prayer on my knees more than anything else. Does that not? I hope that doesn't sound pretentious, but that's my feeling.
thank you.
I thank Tim for what he said, because he gave me the occasion to say something. For example, what I really liked about his film is his questioning. I mean, I am more attracted by his questioning than by Stephen's answers. I mean, I like the way how you said you were naive, but I really enjoyed your naivety, your honesty, and because, you know, to know that we are going to die is scary. Okay, it's impossible to think death. From a phenomenological point of view, nobody can know how it is to be dead. It's impossible as long as we are alive. So that's very scary as a thought. So what I wanted to do in my film, as I said, it was to embody an emotion. But my emotion, while my mother was getting sicker and sicker, was not only fear. We also had a lot of room for fun. We were dancing on the balcony. We were laughing a lot. We were going to the grocery store. We were doing a lot of normal things all the time. So I needed in the film to have some ray of light, because the process of dying, which is the process of living, is not so dark, so sad all the time. I mean, in your film, Tim, I found some lightness, you know. You're lost somehow because you're asking for answers and you're somehow lost, but lost in such a beautiful way. I mean, your fragility in the film is such a present for me as a viewer. So I wanted, in a different manner, to have that in my film. I tried to do it with poetry. Dylan Thomas, John Donne, the never-ending cycle of life and death, rain.
Just
This
the rain. The
metaphor.
rain was beautiful.
I know.
Rain was a lucky shot, because I was writing emails to a nurse who it was a home nurse working with oncological patients, and while he was going from house to house, he was also collecting letters. He gave letters from one person to another person. They didn't know each other, but he created a sort of network. And there was this letter that one guy wrote to another who had some bad news from the last examination. And he said, you know what, this morning I was just drinking this glass of water, and I thought about that article who said that we are mostly made of water. So I said, oh, who knows who was this glass of water before? that was just a perfect thing for me, because when I got that letter, I was in the phase of post-production where the film was completely sad, without hope, was so heavy and gloomy that a consultant to the editing phase was like, come on, it's a little bit too much. I can't stand it. I mean, a viewer cannot stand it. You have to put some ray of light. So I thought of this metaphor of water, and then I reshaped everything and I tried to put some lightness. But your lightness is there because it's you. So thank you, Tim, really, for that approach.
I had a colleague, in fact, who was the composer of the music for my film, Nancy Ackerman, fabulous filmmaker herself. She said, lighten up. You've got to have some humor in your film. And I don't think I managed that, but, you know, I remember that now.
I have to agree with Claudia about seeing you in your film, because I felt like I was in your position while I was watching you. I was like, oh my God, I'm just like Tim. I'm assuming, like, because some of the concepts Stephen was saying, they're hard to grasp. They're not like common knowledge, or it's something you don't necessarily think about. So when you showed yourself kind of perplexed, I was like, I'm exactly like him. I don't understand what's going on. And I remember saying, like, I understand what Stephen is saying here. I need to hold on to this. This morning I forgot what it was, but it's a lot of very cerebral stuff. And I love seeing you going through it.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I had to look at the transcript and read them again and again and again. It took me ages to find out what that film. I mean, my wife got so tired of me not getting the message that he was telling me in my own flippin' film.
They're not easy to grasp, though, I have to say,
No.
but they're very important.
Edgar, now that you're back, because you chose to film the death, so I kind of wanted to have your reaction on that as well.
Well, I think initially I did tell everyone that I thought it was important to film the Jack's dying, or a death of a prisoner, to humanize that and to show everyone that Jack, despite his faults, he is a human being. And so, but as a filmmaker, you know, working alone, having 24 hours access to the prison, I told him from the beginning, I don't know who I'm going to be filming, but I know that a person can die any time of day, and I need to know that if it's happening at 3 a.m, that I'll have permission to come over to the prison. I was living across the street in a basement under the doctor's house that works for the prison, so I was able to walk across the street and go to prison anytime, and I wanted that guarantee because I thought it was very important to show someone passing away, and I did not want to miss that moment. Therefore, I never really left that prison for 6 months, and I could see the trajectory of Jack's illness happening. Couldn't really pinpoint it when it was going to happen, and happened during the 2 o'clock in the afternoon, how it turned out. But as a solo filmmaker, I was very the moment leading up to Jack's passing, I was paranoid that I was not going to have the button, you know, the go button pushed on the record button pushed on my camera, or I was going to forget that I had battery dead. So I had these cargo shorts full of extra tapes and extra. At the very moment that Jack is passing away, some technical difficulties would happen. So I was able to actually, in a weird way, people ask me, how did you feel when Jack was dying? I was so overwhelmed with maybe missing the moment that I wasn't really taking in his death the way his family and his friends were at the moment. But I already knew I was going to film it. I wanted to be above the bed, not showing like an angelic rising out. I felt like I needed to be above, kind of looking down and see how all this is working, how the prison volunteers, hospice volunteers were working, and how Jack's family were around his bed. But I mean, you know, the truth is, and then after Jack passes, all these other things start happening. All things that they have to do. They print the body. They have to wash the body. The prisoners actually wash his body, which is a beautiful, poignant moment. So I wanted to show all these other things that were happening. And, you know, being at that point, I wish I had another filmmaker with me, because I had to run. I was running all over the prison, getting these moments as they wheeled Jack out in a body bag, as the correctional officer was collecting Jack's things. This was all happening simultaneously, and I was like running around the prison like a chicken with my head cut off, trying to get it all, which kind of separated me just happened. I was trained as a hospice volunteer to make this film. I thought I needed to be trained so I knew what I'm going to filming. Jack was actually the first person I ever saw pass away, because once I was trained as a hospice volunteer, I right into prison. So for his death to be my first one, and for me to be filming it, is a weird combination. I'm very close to Jack's family. I was given permission, and Claudia, this is interesting about what you were saying. I was, and what Tim was saying too. I was adamant and showing someone passing away. Thought it was also very important to be close to Jack's family, who thankfully were cool, and I could become friends with them. So I was able to bond with the family members, all the people that I needed to deal with. They were all on board, and so was Jack. Jack, I think ultimately Jack wanted to leave a legacy, for anyone else, any other prisoners who would be in his position. So with his permission and his desire to leave a legacy for others, I think I was given, again, open, like carte blanche to be even in the most poignant, moments of his life and his passing. And his family were all on very accepting. So I felt it was a very unique situation. I felt very honored to be able to be there. And I try to be since I'm a solo filmmaker, I was never like in people's faces too much at the end. So I felt like it was a good balance, and I've known them. I knew everyone for 6 months already, so it was a good feeling. I felt like I was family also, and they made me feel that way. I probably overtalked a little bit. So.
Can I did a lot of thinking after my film. I still do it, wondering whether my use of the camera was two things at once. It was both an approach, and it was also a protection and a withdrawal. And I felt both those things, that I was shielding myself from the intensity of it by being behind the camera while pretending to be in close.
Right.
And I haven't reconciled that.
I think that was for me too. That the truth is, I did fill my camera eye cup with tears, because it was so you're still kind of connected, but you're also disconnected a little bit as you're filming. But I did feel, yeah, that's a good thing we said there.
And I think that brings on the whole issue of voyeurism, which you deal with at length, Outi, in your writing. I mean, that really is a good question. How to be close to the huge thing, but not be consumed by it, or not be flooded by it.
I think since I saw all your films, I know we had to go, but I thought, even though our films are in different locations, I thought they were all so similar in a beautiful way, that we were observing. We're total voyeurs, I suppose, and our moments of being able to just privately observe and film, and I just really thought our films had unbelievable parallels, despite their differences.
Well, we're running out of time. It's already 6 o'clock, but I wanted to raise one of the questions shortly from the chat, asking about what is the audience, or how to how to make people watch this and these kind of films. And I know we don't have appropriate time to take all of the different approaches, but I did ask this from all of the filmmakers I interviewed, and I think it was actually Claudia who said to me that you kind of have to accept that if people go on a date night and they want to go to the movies to see a film, it's not probably one of these films that you are like, let's go and watch someone die or and have fun night out. So that kind of stayed with me throughout the project, that it is a very specialized audience. Usually it's people who have some recent connection to think about these things. Not everybody wants to be reminded that they are dying or and so on. But does any one of you want to take your point of view on these audience questions quickly before we finish? So
yeah, I try to be very quick. This film, The Perfect Circle, was in prime time in Belgium, in television, national television, and it went very well. In Italy, I didn't find any distributor for the film, but I developed an alternative model of distribution. which, let's say, started with a screening in the parliament, where I invited a lot of practitioners and palliative care doctors who came and started to work with politicians to a new law about will dispositions and things like this. Thanks to this, I was able to organize screenings, most of them sold out, in 45 cities in Italy. And these screenings were organized by associations, which I found related to palliative care. So every screening was a sort of event where people came and after a film were talking about their personal life. The funny thing is that men were obliged by wives or partners to come to the movie. They didn't want to come to the movie, but at the end, during the Q&A, they were the only one talking, asking, and explaining how it was like for them to deal with the father's death, the father's illness. So the film was a sort of, we say in Italian, session of auto mutuo aiuto, and when people help each other to grieve. It was something like that. Nobody asked me anything. I was shutting up all the time and people were just explaining, telling, sharing, and it was amazing. So for 1 year, I was screening the film everywhere. It was really beautiful. Of course, Italian TV said, no way.
All right. I think because I promised people that it would be 1 hour of their life to spend with us and listening to us to talk. So I think we need to close here. But thank you all for being here, and especially Claudia, Tim, and Edgar for continuing with me on this journey of discussing this. And if you want to know more about what they have thought about their films, it is part of the Filming Death, the book. And these are the topics that are actually discussed in the book as well. So you can definitely watch their films if you haven't seen them. But if you want a companion to those films, read the book as well. But thank you for being here.